During the dedication ceremony, Evelyn placed a single white rose at the base of the sculpture. As the crowd watched, she spoke softly, yet every word carried the weight of years of hope and remembrance. "My sister taught children to find joy in small things," Evelyn said. She believed that every voice matters. Today we celebrate her life, her legacy, and the truth that finally came to light. Detective Monroe and retired Detective Paul Rennick stood nearby. Rennick's voice, though steady, held a gentle tremor. "She would be proud of how this town kept her memory alive," he said. Monroe nodded. "And every child she taught carries a piece of her with them." The memorial became an annual gathering spot. Each spring, students placed music sheets and hand-painted notes along the path, remembering Caroline's dedication to nurturing creativity. Families returned to tell stories, share memories, and reflect on how one life had touched so many. In 2021, the Kentucky State Police created a small educational exhibit highlighting the Caroline Hart case. The exhibit included original photographs, preserved evidence, and testimonials from students and investigators. Visitors were encouraged to consider the importance of patience, collaboration, and the steady pursuit of truth, values that Caroline's story exemplified. Monroe oversaw the project personally. As she guided school groups through the exhibit, she explained not only the investigative techniques, but also the human story behind the evidence. "This case isn't just about solving a crime," she told the students. "It's about remembering someone's life, honoring their contributions, and ensuring their story inspires others." Evelyn often attended the exhibit's openings. One evening, she reflected on the decades that had passed since Caroline's disappearance. She remembered the fear, the uncertainty, and the quiet determination of those who refused to let the case be forgotten. Now, she saw the fruits of that dedication. A community transformed by truth, remembrance, and celebration. The community also honored Monroe and Rennick for their unwavering commitment. At a town council meeting, they presented the detectives with a plaque that read, "For tireless dedication to truth, for honoring memory with action, for proving that patience and integrity can shine brighter than time itself." Monroe hung the plaque in her office next to a framed note from Rennick. His handwriting, shaky but earnest, read, "Proud of you. Caroline's story lives because you kept it alive." Beside it, she placed the paper crane given to her years earlier by Evelyn, a simple yet profound reminder of hope and perseverance. The impact of Caroline's story extended beyond Bowling Green. Criminal justice students from across Kentucky studied the case as part of their coursework, examining how evidence preservation, community involvement, and advances in forensic science could intersect to provide long-delayed answers. Caroline's story became a model for balancing investigative rigor with humanity, inspiring future generations of detectives and educators alike. In the spring of 2023, an art display at Fairview Elementary featured original student artwork inspired by Caroline's life. Children painted landscapes, musical notes, and portraits, all reflecting the vibrancy and warmth that had defined her classroom. Evelyn walked among the displays, quietly moved by the creativity and remembrance. Monroe joined her near the center of the exhibition, where a large painting depicted a teacher standing amid a field of blooming flowers, arms outstretched as if embracing the entire town. "She's still here," Evelyn said softly, gesturing toward the painting. "In every note, every brushstroke, every life she touched." Monroe smiled. "Her legacy isn't just remembered, it lives in action." As the sun set over Bowling Green that evening, the streets glowed with warm light, and the town seemed to hum with quiet contentment. The Memorial Garden's pathways reflected the soft amber of lanterns, the engraved stones catching the last rays of sunlight. Detective Monroe walked along the path one last time that day, pausing at the central sculpture. The open hands seemed to reach not only toward the sky but also toward the future, a future shaped by memory, truth, and the enduring influence of one remarkable teacher. She knelt beside the plaque, placing her hand gently on the engraved letters. For Caroline Hart, a teacher, a sister, a light that time could never dim. In the distance, children's laughter echoed faintly, carried on the spring breeze. It was a sound Caroline would have cherished, a reminder that life, music, and hope continue, even after decades of silence. Monroe stood, taking one final look at the garden. She felt the weight of years lift, replaced by a quiet sense of fulfillment. The case had been solved, yes, but more importantly, Caroline's story had been honored, remembered, and celebrated. The town of Bowling Green had reclaimed its melody. The darkness of uncertainty had given way to the light of truth. And in that light, Caroline Hart's legacy would shine for generations to come. Monroe requested that a search be conducted on archived personal effects and old fingerprints. She cross-referenced with national databases and sent the mitochondrial DNA for comparison against new records. It was painstaking work, taking months to sort through old data and reconcile it with newer submissions. Then, in 2016, a breakthrough occurred. A new familial DNA submission matched the profile derived from the hair and blanket fibers. The system identified a living relative of Richard Mays, whose DNA confirmed a direct link. Monroe stared at the report, hardly daring to breathe. Decades of unanswered questions, decades of the town's quiet grief had finally led to a tangible lead. The investigation intensified. Monroe gathered a team to reconstruct the evidence. Reviewing the original photographs, witness statements, and reports, they discovered subtle details previously overlooked. A note in Mays's school volunteer log about moving speakers after the concert that aligned perfectly with witness recollections of him helping Caroline. Though he had passed away in the early 2000s, the DNA evidence now provided undeniable confirmation. Monroe contacted Detective Rennick, who had been retired for over 20 years. He received the news with quiet satisfaction, his voice steady but full of emotion. "We kept her story alive," he said. "Now we know the truth." The revelation quickly made its way to Caroline's sister, Evelyn Hart, who had stayed in Bowling Green and devoted her life to teaching music. Evelyn remembered Caroline's gentle laughter and her habit of leaving small gifts for students. When Monroe visited to explain the new findings, Evelyn listened quietly, absorbing the information in stunned but calm acceptance. "They finally know," Evelyn whispered. "They finally know what happened to her." Monroe arranged for the confirmation to be officially documented by the Kentucky State Police. Though Richard Mays had passed, his responsibility was recognized, and the historical record could now reflect the truth. The community responded with a mixture of relief and reflection. Local newspapers ran feature articles on Caroline Hart's life and the decades-long effort to find closure. Students, both former and current, organized an impromptu tribute at Fairview Elementary, displaying art, photographs, and sheet music that highlighted Caroline's dedication. Monroe oversaw a small educational symposium for law enforcement, using Caroline's case to demonstrate the power of preserving evidence and the importance of patience. She explained how modern DNA analysis had finally provided the answers that had eluded investigators for over 30 years. The room was filled with officers, forensic scientists, and students of criminal justice, all captivated by the story of dedication, remembrance, and eventual discovery. In 2018, a memorial plaque was installed at the old tobacco barn where Caroline had been found. The ceremony brought together townspeople, school officials, former students, and family members. Flowers were laid along the path, candles flickered in the soft evening light, and musicians played Caroline's favorite compositions on piano and violin. Evelyn placed a single white rose beside the plaque, feeling a peace she hadn't known since her sister's disappearance. "You finally come home, Caroline," she whispered, her voice carrying over the gentle hum of cicadas. Monroe and Rennick stood together, observing the scene. It's incredible, Rennick said. After all this time, the truth shines through. Monroe nodded, reflecting on the years of quiet work, patience, and the subtle power of forensic science combined with human dedication. It does, she replied, and her story will continue to inspire. The memorial became a yearly site for remembrance, a place where the town could celebrate Caroline's life rather than mourn her passing. Every spring, students placed sheet music on the bench, flowers on the stones, and held brief concerts to honor the teacher who had believed every child could sing. As Monroe walked the path home that evening, she paused by the engraved plaque, reading the words chosen by Caroline's family. For Caroline Hart, whose music carried us through the years, whose kindness never faded, whose memory reminds us that hope endures. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that decades of dedication had finally broken the silence that had hung over Bowling Green since 1982. By 2019, Bowling Green had become a quiet, reflective town, where the memory of Caroline Hart lingered like a soft melody through the streets. Though decades had passed, the discovery and confirmation of Richard Mays's responsibility brought clarity and a sense of closure that had long been absent. Detective Lila Monroe remained deeply involved in preserving Caroline's story. She ensured that every piece of evidence, every report, and every photograph was archived carefully, serving as both a historical record and an educational tool. Monroe had grown into her role as head of the cold case unit, mentoring younger detectives in persistence, patience, and the delicate handling of sensitive cases. Caroline's sister, Evelyn Hart, took an active role in sharing her sister's story. She founded the Caroline Hart Music Scholarship, awarded each year to a student pursuing music education. The scholarship emphasized creativity, kindness, and community engagement, all values Caroline had embodied. At Fairview Elementary, the annual spring concert continued as a tradition, now officially dedicated to Caroline. Students performed her favorite pieces, and teachers incorporated her approach to nurturing creativity into their lesson plans. Former students, now grown with families of their own, returned to help lead performances and mentor the children. Monroe often attended these concerts. One evening, she walked quietly through the empty music room after the event, gazing at the upright piano where Caroline had spent so many afternoons. A single sheet of music lay on the stand, a simple piece titled Morning Light, known to have been one of Caroline's favorites. Monroe ran her fingers lightly over the keys, imagining the gentle, guiding hands that had once played them. The police department, inspired by the case's resolution, initiated a statewide program to preserve and digitize cold case evidence systematically. Monroe spoke at a symposium on best practices in forensic preservation, emphasizing how Caroline Hart's case demonstrated the critical importance of patience, meticulous record-keeping, and the unwavering pursuit of truth. In the fall of 2020, a small memorial garden was established near the old tobacco barn where Caroline had been found. Town volunteers built walking paths lined with engraved stones, each bearing the names of those who had contributed to the search over the decades. At the center stood a sculpture of open hands, a nod to Caroline's belief in nurturing potential and giving support where it was needed most. Spring of 1982 settled gently over Bowling Green, Kentucky, carrying the smell of honeysuckle and fresh-cut hay. The town still moved at the rhythm of church bells and Friday night ball games. People left their doors unlocked, trusting the quiet routines that shaped their lives. Among those routines was Caroline Hart, 26 years old, an elementary music teacher known for the small kindnesses that filled her days. Every morning she rode her yellow bicycle to Fairview Elementary, her long brown hair tied with a silk ribbon that trailed behind her in the wind. She believed every child had a song waiting to be heard, and her classroom always echoed with bright laughter and tambourine beats. Caroline lived alone in a white-painted cottage on Maple Lane, a short walk from the school. The house once belonged to her grandmother, and she had filled it with the sound of her piano, fresh flowers, and framed sheet music along the walls. Neighbors often saw her on the porch at dusk, humming softly while grading papers or reading. In late April, Fairview prepared for its annual spring concert, a local tradition where parents filled the auditorium to watch their children perform. Caroline directed the choir with a calm focus that made even the shyest students sing boldly. Her principal, Mr. Eldon Pierce, once said, "She brings light wherever she goes." The kids don't just learn music, they learn joy. That concert, held on Friday, April 23rd, was her proudest night. The children sang 3 songs ending with "Somewhere Over the Rainbow," their voices rising in harmony that filled the hall. Parents stood clapping and cheering as Caroline bowed modestly from the stage. Afterward, she chatted with families in the lobby, promising to post photos on the bulletin board Monday morning. When the crowd finally thinned, Caroline left carrying her music binder and bouquet of daisies. She waved to the janitor, Frank Bishop, who was locking the side doors, then walked toward her bicycle under the yellow glow of the street lamps. It was the last confirmed sighting of her. The next morning, when she didn't arrive at the community breakfast she had promised to attend, her friend Margaret Hill, the school librarian, drove to Caroline's cottage. The curtains were open, the radio still softly tuned to the local station, and her bicycle leaned against the porch rail as if she had returned home. Inside, everything looked neat. Bed made, dishes washed, except for her handbag missing from its usual spot by the piano bench. Margaret called the police by noon. Officer Leon Keller, a calm-spoken patrolman, arrived first. He noticed no broken glass, no forced entry. On the kitchen counter sat a mug of cold coffee and a half-written thank you note addressed to the PTA for flowers after the concert. The note ended mid-sentence. Within hours, more officers joined the search. Volunteers canvassed Maple Lane, checking backyards, barns, and nearby fields. By evening, the local radio issued a bulletin asking anyone who had seen Caroline the night before to contact the station. Sunday came with spring rain, soft but steady. Dozens of townspeople gathered under umbrellas at the school parking lot, forming search lines through the woods behind Fairview. Children clung to parents, sensing worry they couldn't name. That evening, detectives discovered Caroline's handbag near a narrow service road half a mile from the school. It lay beside wildflowers, its contents scattered but intact. Wallet, keys, sheet music pages damp from the rain. Detective Paul Rennick, who took over the case, carefully logged the evidence. "It looks like someone placed it, not dropped it," he noted in his report. The words would echo in his mind for years. The search widened over the next days. The National Guard sent a small team to assist, and news outlets from Nashville to Louisville reported on the missing teacher from Bowling Green. Friends described her as gentle and hopeful, a person who believed every melody could lift a heart. Despite exhaustive effort, by the first week of May there was still no trace. The community held vigils, singing her favorite hymns beneath candlelight. Mr. Pierce kept her classroom door closed, saying he couldn't bear to hear silence where music once lived. 2 months later, on June 29th, a farmer walking near a creek outside Allen County, 20 miles south, found a piece of floral fabric caught on a fence. He thought little of it until he noticed nearby footprints leading toward an old tobacco barn. Inside, in a shallow hollow near the back wall, officers later discovered what everyone had feared: human remains, wrapped carefully in a blanket patterned with tiny musical notes. A locket found with the remains contained a photo of 2 sisters, Caroline and Margaret, taken the previous Christmas. Identification came swiftly. For a moment, all of Bowling Green seemed to stop. Church bells rang at noon and businesses dimmed their lights. People lined the street as officers carried the evidence boxes from the barn. Detective Rennick stayed behind after the scene cleared, listening to the sound of rain against the tin roof. Something about the careful way the blanket was folded struck him as deliberate, almost reverent. Whoever had left Caroline there had known her. Investigators gathered every scrap they could find: fibers, hair strands, soil. But technology in 1982 couldn't provide the answers they needed. Tests were limited to basic serology. DNA sequencing was still years away. The case would rely entirely on interviews and intuition. Detectives questioned more than 100 people over the summer. One name appeared repeatedly in the margins of witness statements: Richard Mays, 31, a part-time mechanic who volunteered at the school auditorium to help with sound equipment. He had been seen talking to Caroline after the concert that night. When questioned, he said he helped her carry speakers to the back room and left shortly after, driving home alone. His truck was searched. Nothing suspicious found. Lacking evidence, police couldn't move forward. By autumn, the investigation slowed, though the memory of Caroline's kindness didn't fade. Her students performed that year's winter concert in her honor, singing softly under paper snowflakes she had designed before she disappeared. Parents wept quietly in the audience. Detective Rennick visited the barn site one last time before winter. He placed a single daisy there, whispering a promise he intended to keep. "We'll find who did this, no matter how long it takes." Then the file went into storage, carefully labeled but unfinished. By the late 1980s, the quiet town of Bowling Green had learned to speak of Caroline Hart in hushed tones, never forgetting the teacher who had brought so much music into the lives of children. Her classroom at Fairview Elementary remained preserved as a memory of her presence. Music sheets neatly stacked, instruments polished, and the piano at the front left untouched. Detective Paul Rennick remained on the case even as years passed. He moved through promotions and changes in the department, but Caroline's file stayed in the top drawer of his desk, a constant reminder of a promise he had made beneath the tin roof of that old tobacco barn. "We'll find her story's ending," he often whispered to himself. Through the 1990s, technology began to advance. Serology tests became more refined, and small breakthroughs in forensic analysis allowed cold case units to re-examine old evidence with hope. Yet Caroline's case remained frustratingly elusive. The blanket and fabric found near the barn had been preserved meticulously, but the fibers were too degraded for early DNA testing. Soil samples were reanalyzed, but no conclusive traces could link a suspect to the site. Rennick retired in 1995 but passed the case to Detective Lila Monroe, a determined investigator just starting her career in cold cases. Lila grew up in Bowling Green and remembered the flyers posted around town as a child. Walking into Caroline's file for the first time, she was struck by the careful documentation and the kindness Caroline had brought into so many lives. Monroe began methodically re-examining the evidence. She revisited witness statements, mapping their locations with the site of the barn. She discovered that certain details overlooked years ago hinted at someone with knowledge of the school's routines, a person who had been trusted by staff and students alike. One breakthrough came in 2001 when the Kentucky State Police upgraded their DNA processing capabilities. Monroe submitted the preserved hair strand and the fibers from the blanket for mitochondrial DNA testing. The lab returned partial results, not enough to identify a specific individual, but sufficient to allow future matches. The evidence was stored digitally in the newly established state database, awaiting the expansion of national DNA resources. While science advanced, the town continued to remember Caroline. Annual concerts at Fairview featured one song in her honor. Former students who had never known her personally contributed artwork to her classroom display. Families told stories of the teacher who believed every child could sing boldly, teaching lessons that extended far beyond music. By 2010, Monroe had become head of the cold case unit. She reviewed Caroline's file again, this time integrating technological advances with careful analysis of historical reports. She revisited all school volunteers from 1982 and discovered a name that had appeared repeatedly but never fully investigated: Richard Mays. At the time, Mays had volunteered to assist with the spring concert and had been one of the last adults to see Caroline that night. In the 1980s, nothing tied him directly to the crime, but the Modern Review allowed investigators to examine his movements in new light.